Good afternoon. It's Thursday, the 28th of September 2017, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. I'm your host, Brian Gerrish. With me in the studio, of course, Mike Robinson. Well, what a tremendous day it is today, Mike, because apparently Britain has now got a fishing boat. Let's put this on the screen. I'll apologise, of course, because we've used Google here, and a few of our viewers and listeners would prefer us to use another search engine, which we do. However, there it is, clearly highlighted in the bottom left-hand corner, new 30 million trawler for the fishing fleet. So this is good news. It's high profile on the BBC, Mike. And as we're about to see, this is really a major event for our shipbuilding and fishing industry. Excellent. Saved, I've added the headline there.
Right.
Okay. So where do you think that this ship was built?
Well,
it was built in Denmark, so no worries there. We've got a new fishing boat, but it was built in Denmark. Should be based in Northern Ireland, but unfortunately, harbour infrastructure is badly neglected. This is quite a big trawler, to be fair, but nevertheless, it's true that around UK, of course, all the fishing port infrastructure has been neglected for years after our fishing rights were simply handed over to the European Union. But there we are, good news. We haven't got a navy as such, tongue-in-cheek comment, of course, but we didn't build this boat, but luckily those nice Danes did. And the Voyager, she's called, is apparently an expression of confidence in the future of fishing.
So no doubt the BBC article covered in detail what effect Brexit will have on the UK's fishing industry.
Nothing about that at all, presumably because nothing is really going to change because there is no Brexit, Mike. And if that's the good news for fishing, I'll just pop this one in because I just noticed this one, but Bridgend Council has apparently made a few errors over housing benefits. Some people have been paid a little bit too much, some a little bit under, but this is only an error. So shortage of money, I think, probably.
Yes, well, shortage of money. Apparently the Bank of England doesn't have any shortage of money. But anyway, you know, as we mentioned the other day, they're holding this event today, 20 years on from their independence revolution. Well, Mark Carnage this morning was really pleased to introduce none other than ex-Bank of England banker herself, Theresa May.
I didn't know that, actually, Mike. I've heard that UK news column news is particularly good, and I learnt something straight off the cuff. Well, I did not realise that as well as Home Secretary, she's also dabbled in banking.
Well, indeed, because she was a financial consultant for the Bank of England from 1985 to 1997, so quite a reasonable career there. Anyway, she spoke about the decision to give operational independence to the Bank of England, by Tony Blair's government in 1997. In fact, this was one of his first acts. It was almost as if it was in return for getting the job in the first place, but you know, I couldn't possibly comment on that. She told the governor what a great guy he is, but she said that problems were developing which would later become apparent she started talking about the financial crisis in 2007, 2008. She said the Great Recession which followed that crisis brought some of the most challenging economic times our country has known. She said the bank was inevitably caught up in the dramatic events of 2007, 2008, and that the tripartite regulatory system of which the bank was a part didn't prove to be a success. But don't worry, it's all fine. Real progress has been made over the last 7 years, and the bank has played its part in that, using its independent monetary policy tools like interest rates and quantitative easing to support our economy through the crisis and into the recovery, except, well, indeed, it didn't, because just about everybody is in agreement that the quantitative easing has not failed has failed as a policy, and really, it's the Bank of England has done nothing to help whatsoever.
Just to remind ourselves on this, of course, UK quantitative easing was 800 billion. Was that the right figure, Mike? Can you remember exactly?
No, I think it's. I can't remember what it is at the moment. I think it's about 40 billion a month at the moment.
Oh, right. Okay.
A month.
A month. Yeah.
Okay. So quantitative easing doesn't work. It has done nothing for the economy. But don't worry, because she's going to restore faith in a free market economy. Because as she said here, globalization which has brought us a great many benefits. I'm not clear who us is in this context, but that's what she said. Has also brought changes which have contributed to the wider sense that our economy is not working as it should for everyone in our society. So that's fine. And those of us who believe that the interests of the British people are best served through a successful, open, free market economy need to be honest about where it's not currently working or delivering for ordinary working people today. Well, we could mention Bombardier, for example, and the whole spat with Boeing, because it's certainly not working in that case. She went on to say, Britain sets the global standard for high quality corporate governance. International firms are attracted to the UK in part because of the strengths of our regulatory system. Well, of course, one of the strengths of our regulatory system is that they don't have to pay any tax. So Google, for example, £36 million tax on £1 billion revenues, as was reported in many newspapers earlier in the year, and also reported on Politics Home, of course, was that HMRC had agreed to repay Google £31 million in corporation. Now, just remember their bill for this year was £36 million,
and they're going to get
they got £31 million in a rebate. That's fair enough, isn't it?
It is fair enough, yeah.
So clearly that's working well. Then what did she go on to discuss? Our new economic partnership with the European Union. This was the thing that I really wanted to focus on, because she said that this is a crucial time to address fundamental economic questions. Last week in Florence, she set out her vision for the new economic partnership she wants Britain to have with the European Union in the years ahead. The vision is rooted, she said, in a belief in a well-regulated, open, free market economy with sound money and stable prices. As I set out, in leaving the EU, the UK will no longer be members of its single market or customs union. This, of course, will mean changes. You cannot have all the benefits of membership of a single market without its obligations. So our next task is to find a new framework that allows for a close economic partnership which holds those rights and obligations in a new and different balance. So in other words, what she's saying is we're going to end up in exactly the same situation. We're on paper not going to be within the single market and the customs union, but in practice we are going to be within the single market and the customs union, because we're going to find a new framework. It's going to be a close economic partnership just as we have at the moment, and of course we'll be obliged to maintain the terms and conditions of that. This
is classic change agenda, Mike. I remember many years ago I questioned the chief executive of Derriford Hospital in Plymouth over the fact that they'd had nursing shortages, and then they'd spent about $4 million on trying to solve that. And I asked him where these changes had brought him, and he said, well, really, we're back where we started. So this is just a revolving process. You talk about change, but actually nothing's going to change and the chaos continues.
Well, it got better, because she said that in forging our new partnership, we shall start from an unprecedented position. At the point of our exit, we will have exactly the same rules and regulations as the EU, as our EU withdrawal bill will ensure that they are carried over into our domestic law. The challenge then is not how to bring our rules and regulations closer together, but what to do when one of us wants to make changes. So
we're not going to change anything.
That's right.
We're going to be out, but nothing will be changed.
That's right.
But if we do want to change anything, we've got to...
Well, if we do want to change anything, basically she has said nothing about how that process would happen, because she doesn't actually know, I think, is the main point. Or the intention is that we will not diverge in this way. And just to finish this bit off then, she finished off by saying that the UK financial markets provide support for businesses and consumers right across the EU, reducing the cost of capital and supporting choice and innovation for customers. It is in neither the EU's nor the UK's interest to see these financial service markets fragment. And that is another reason I'm confident we can agree a new partnership that enables us to continue to work together to bring prosperity for all our people. So, I'm just going to keep banging this home. This is not about leaving the European Union. This is about a new partnership. So let's have a look at what David Davis had to say, because he was giving his closing remarks at the end of the fourth round of EU exit negotiations in Brussels. And again, I'm going to highlight this because in the government press release, the words were, the statement follows the fourth round of negotiations for a new partnership with the European Union. So this is what we're talking about. New partnership. And David Davis had to say, in a recent speech, the Prime Minister reassured our European partners they will not need to pay more or receive less over the remainder of the current EU budget planner as a result of our decision to leave. The UK has explained our reassurance in detail to the Commission. So it's all been explained to the Commission, hasn't been explained to the people or the media or anybody other than the Commission. But this was the key point. The Prime Minister also made clear the UK will honour its commitments made during the period of our membership. We are not yet at the stage of specifying exactly what those commitments are.
I am lost for words at this point because I'm thinking, do I really understand what that man's saying? So we've got commitments.
No, it's much worse than this. We have guaranteed those commitments to the European Commission, but we're not telling anybody what the commitments are. No,
because you wouldn't want the general public to actually know what this criminal government is up to. Astonishing stuff. And it appears at the moment that it's only the UK column that is actually drilling down and producing the analysis on this completely duplicitous stance by Theresa May's treasonous Conservative government.
That's Absolutely, yes. Let's move on to defence. Good news, Brian, because Michael Fallon was in Belfast yesterday, unveiling the name of one of the new Type 26 frigates. It's going to be called HMS Belfast, and this is the second ship to be named of the City class of 8 brand new cutting-edge anti-submarine warfare frigates, and it's going to provide advanced protection for the likes of the UK's nuclear deterrent and also for the Queen Elizabeth class aircraft carriers. So you should rest assured, Brian, that all your concerns about who's going to protect the Queen Elizabeth class aircraft carriers, this has now been answered because this new swathe of computer-generated ships is going to do it.
Yes, in the future, we will be able to defend the aircraft carrier, which will in the future allegedly have some aircraft on board it.
Absolutely. Yeah. And of course, HMS Belfast is going to be the second ship named in honour of the city, following the original HMS Belfast, which fought in the Second World War. We'll come on to that in a second. So what did Michael Fallon have to say? I'm hugely proud that the second name announced in our 8 cutting-edge new Type 26 frigates will be HMS Belfast. She and her sister ships will form the backbone of our Navy well into the 2060s, keeping us safe by protecting the country's nuclear deterrent and new aircraft carriers. It's apt to name this ship at the famous site which built the very first HMS Belfast. Thanks to our ambitious new shipbuilding strategy, this shipyard once again has the chance to be involved in building a British warship, thanks to the competition to build a new class of light frigates for our growing Navy. Now, the key word there, Brian, is involved. So Harland & Wolff has a chance to get involved in this, because what's he talking about? Well, of course, the new ambitious, as he describes it, national shipbuilding strategy says that these ships are going to be built in pieces and carted halfway across the country somewhere where they might be eventually assembled at a central hub. So no shipyard gets to build the ship from laying the keel to fit out and so on, and sea trials.
If I just add into that, of course, the old Belfast, I think, was built in a little under 2 years and was one of 10 town class. So when we're talking about the 1938, the Second World War Belfast, Britain was simply capable of building 10 of that class in addition to all the other major warships being built. And now we're getting very excited because we've got one new warship which is going to be named after HMS Belfast.
Yes. Well, what happens to HMS Belfast then? Because there it is at Tower Bridge, of course, part of the War Museum. There it is, rather. HMS Belfast is going to be renamed. It's now going to be called HMS Belfast brackets 1938.
Right.
Yes, I'm not really quite sure what to say to that, but there you go.
We're going to keep smiling, Mike, because there's nothing else to do. We are now watching absolute nonsense appear in everything to do with government policy and defence, of course, which is such a serious subject. This is complete madness, this announcing that 1 or 2 ships built in pieces with the objective, of course, of helping the EU military unification is somehow representative of a navy. And how is it we have all of these senior military officers kowtowing to Michael Fallon, whose expertise is in children's nurseries?
Yes. Now, the other thing that he did mention was that, of course, this new batch of frigates is being built not only for Britain's use, but hopefully for the export market as well. I realise in a globalised world that seems to be the way to do things, but is it not a bit silly to sell people that may potentially become enemies in the future your own designs?
We've been doing this over many years, Mark. Mike, absolutely crazy, and we need people to be standing up and challenging this utter nonsense. But most of this is a smokescreen because, of course, Britain's military has been dismantled in order to ease in the EU unification. So what we've got by Fallon here is essentially a propaganda campaign to give people the illusion that they still have armed forces representing this country.
Well, Michael Fallon's particularly good at running propaganda campaigns because he was in the second story today, and that is the fact that Britain has defeated ISIS, apparently. Yes, I was equally impressed. Apparently, ISIS fighters are being pinned down by the Royal Air Force in their former stronghold of Raqqa, as the UK marks 3 years of tackling this barbaric cult in Iraq and Syria.
Right, so a couple of aircraft, in the scale of things, dropping a very small number of bombs we've been the major component in defeating them.
Well, so he claims. Royal Air Force aircraft destroyed 17 targets in Syria in a single day last week, apparently. It doesn't say what the targets were, forcing Daesh to splinter and retreat from areas it ruled when the UK voted to begin airstrikes in September 2014. It's fantastic. Fallon himself said Britain has made a major contribution. Sorry, I'll rephrase that. Fallon himself lied that Britain has made a major contribution to the campaign that has crippled Daesh since 2014, forcing this miserable cult from the gates of Baghdad to the brink of defeat in Raqqa.
It's just outrageous that any politician should be allowed to make such inaccurate statements.
Well, unfortunately, Boris Johnson was unavailable for comment. So anyway, let's move on. And I want to highlight this article from the Duran, breaking Iraq authorities' troop deployment in Kirkuk. Now, this is obviously the situation in Iraq with the Kurdish secessionists as they're being described. This is an article written by a news report written by Adam Gary, and basically making the point that Kirkuk is being claimed by Kurdish secessionists, even though it's not part of existing autonomous Kurdish regions of Iraq. This is following the referendum over the Kurdish attempts to create a state of their own. And Iraq has given Kurdish leaders a 3-day ultimatum to hand over the regional airports to Iraqi authorities. Iraq's Prime Minister has a parliamentary mandate to send Iraqi troops to Kirkuk to police the general security against the secessionist activities. And this morning on the BBC's Today programme, they were speaking to Muwafaq al-Rubieh, who's Iraq's former national security advisor, and he was again reiterating that the referendum that was held earlier in the week is unconstitutional. Now, earlier I spoke to Adam Gary, who's written this article, and I began by asking him what his thoughts are on the Kurdish referendum in the context of this decision by the Iraqi government to deploy troops to Kirkuk.
Well, the referendum is worse than a disaster. It's a blunder. The Iraqi authorities since 2005 and even before, even dating back to the mid and late 1990s when Saddam Hussein was still the president of Iraq, the Kurds in northern Iraq gained an increased amount of autonomy. They got much of what they want. And for the last 10 years or more, they've been running the place more or less like a little statelet within a country. And it just about kind of sort of worked. By going for secession, for independence as they call it, they've essentially lit a match onto a barrel of gunpowder. You've got Iran and Turkey collaborating to close the airspace, so you've got an effective no-fly zone. You've got Iraqi troops with Turkish troops on the Turkish side of the border participating in military drills. We all know what that's for a possible joint intervention into the area, which Iraq, of course, has the legal legal right to do. And if they're cooperating with Turkey, that means that a Turkish presence would also be legal, something not really, it didn't seem feasible even a year ago when the Iraqis were upset with Turkey intervening into the country under the guise of fighting Daesh ISIS without Baghdad's permission. And then finally, you've got Baghdad giving an ultimatum to the Kurds, saying you've got to hand over the airports. Now, the airports in these regions of northern Iraq were being run by the Kurds for years on Iraqi soil. They even had their own visa issuing apparatus. And so now you've actually got Iraq saying, because you went against the country, your mother country, because you went against international opinion, because you've sided with the eternal enemy of the Arab world in Israel, the only country in the universe which supports this secession, we're going to take back what is rightfully yours. So where you had a situation that even in spite of Daesh's presence in the region that was just about manageable, you've now got a situation of total chaos. And it wouldn't surprise me at all if Turkish troops cross the border in tanks, and quite a lot of them at that, either before the end of this week or certainly before the end of next.
To put this in the broader context, if you could, I mean, is there any evidence, for example, that they chose to run this referendum now through some kind of external influence?
Well, the referendum has been arranged for the better part of a year now, so everyone saw it coming, and in recent months, many people tried to stop them from making it. The US, which has had an on-again, off-again relationship with the Kurds, one based on supposed advantage, they told them not to do it. Russia, which dating back to the 18th, 19th century, has had good, cordial relations with regional Kurds, they told them not to do that. All of the Arab countries in the region told them not to do it. Iran, which has had a perversely, surprisingly is the better word, good relationship with Iraqi Kurds, they said no. And Turkey, which has a relationship with Iraqi Kurds that is generally okay, very surprising though that is given the relationship with Kurds in other regions, they were dead set against it. And now Erdogan has said that Turkey is going to impose an embargo. Military action is very much on the table when you listen to his remarks. So the referendum was something that I think many people thought wasn't going to happen, but the Kurds did it. They took a big gamble and they've already lost. The question now is how much more can they lose? They backed themselves into a corner. Syria has observed this, and quite wisely they've said, look, once the war against jihadism is finished, we'll have a post-Civil War domestic debate with Kurdish leaders in Syria about autonomy. But the lesson here is that if Kurds in Syria, where they would almost certainly be backed by the US, try to do this, it's not going to end well. The fact of the matter is Turkey is not going to allow for a Kurdish state under any circumstances anytime soon, and even beyond that. And so they made a very bad decision. The Turks in 2010 built the Kurds an airport in northern Iraq, but now they've turned the Turks entirely against them by going against international opinion on all sides.
Okay, so finally on this then, where do you see this going in the not too distant future? Are we looking at a general breakdown in the Middle East as a result of this?
I think the best analogy is what happened in northern Cyprus in 1974, when the Turks unilaterally came in, occupied northern Cyprus, and have effectively illegally annexed it. The difference with this situation is the Iraqis, mostly for pragmatic reasons, but also because it does behoove Arab countries to have normal relations with the Turks. They're now working with the Turks at a military level. They're doing these drills together. So what you could see is a legal type of presence of Turkish troops with Iraqi permission to essentially say, we are going to stop you from unilaterally creating a statelet that no one in the world apart from Israel recognizes.
So thanks very much to Adam Gary for that. Very interesting commentary on what's going on with the Kurds.
And very dangerous situation, which of course is growing all the time, Mike.
Absolutely. And of course, every time we have this type of problems in the Middle East and other parts of the world, we end up with people becoming refugees and migrating.
Indeed, and particularly vulnerable, of course, are the children. But according to the Telegraph, Brexit must mean more, not less, for child refugees. So I'm not quite sure how this pans out because we've shown quite conclusively there is no such thing as Brexit, but apparently Brexit is going to mean we must do more for the child refugees. And within this article, I was intrigued to see UNICEF UK has been warning that there are children still in Afghanistan whose homes are lost and embark on long, dangerous journeys. There's still children whose parents have been killed in the brutal Syrian war, looking for a route out. For those children with family in the UK, family reunion is their best hope. So the whole article is about more children, getting more children into UK. Well, I took the opportunity to call UNICEF UK because I wanted to know what they had done in order to track down the 360 missing Syrian children from the last little influx. Now, I spoke to a very nice lady in media. She couldn't answer the question. I've been invited to email UNICEF, so I will be intrigued to see what they say. But we've got lots of people encouraging more and more vulnerable children into UK. But the big problem is that once they're here, they're even more vulnerable due to state-backed traffickers and abusers.
Absolutely, and of course, UNICEF, they're saying they've bring them into the country and they can go and stay with family. But of course, many of the refugees that have come into the country don't have family here. They've ended up in the care system, and that's where these children are going missing from.
Yep.
Okay. Quick advertisement once again for Alternative View 8.1, the interim Alternative View conference taking place on Sunday the 8th of October, 11 a.m. to 6 p.m. in the Connaught Rooms in London. Brian will be speaking at that, as will Patrick Henningsen, Ian R. Crane and Dr. Graham Downing. And also Frome Stop Wars Media on Trial event on the 19th of October, beginning at 7 p.m. That's on a Thursday night at the Bloomsbury Central Baptist Church. Details of that are on Eventbrite. You can get your tickets there. Do get along to that if you get a chance. Now, Brian, headline in the Plymouth Herald yesterday: Devon and Cornwall police officers sentenced for indecent images of children and illegal ammunition offences. Now, this is a guy called Jonathan Fulcher, and he is 34 years old. He appeared in Exeter Crown Court, and he was given, well, you would imagine, a custodial sentence, would you not?
Well, it seems quite a dangerous combination, indecent images and ammunition.
Well, in fact, he was given an 8-month sentence, suspended for 2 years, so he will spend no time in prison. He was also given a sexual harm prevention order, and he was placed on the sexual offenders register for making indecent images of a child between June 2010 and October 2016, so 6 years. And also possession of ammunition without a firearm certificate. Now, apparently what he had done was that he had sent pictures of himself in uniform. This reminds me of your comments yesterday about somebody in police uniform, a serving police officer in Britain's Got Talent. This very strange use of the uniform. So he was sending pictures of himself in uniform and images of his private parts to an internet chat room where he thought he was speaking to a 13-year-old girl, but unfortunately he was speaking to, unfortunately for him, Department of Homeland Security agents, who then reported back to the British authorities. And he was attempting to groom this 13-year-old girl. He was found with screenshots of 6 other girls who had met in chat forums. And this is the bit that really gave me a kick here, Brian, because I'll just quote from the article here. It says, charges of online grooming were dropped because the images themselves were the only evidence of the ages of the girls, and police experts decided that it was impossible to prove that they were under 16. Now, I'm confused. I thought that was for a jury to decide.
One would have thought so. How could this man get off with such a light sentence? Was he part of a club? I think this is the key question. It's one of the key points that, of course, Robert Greene, for example, and many other people who are fighting child abuse keep trying to push this point over to the general public, that this abuse system is not one or two isolated abusers. It works in rings, it works in clubs, and in an abuse club you may have somebody, a policeman, you might have a road sweeper, you could have a judge, and they are going to absolutely protect each other. So, of course, are we starting to see these people protecting each other? Well, where's it heading? Many people say that the plan in Europe is to make child abuse normal, acceptable and within the law. And it took Russia Today to pick up on this one. An 11-year-old girl supposedly had consensual sex with a 28-year-old man. The French prosecutors basically said they were going to drop the rape charges. He still faces accusations of sexual assault, but the prosecution, and it appears that the judge in this case has accepted that the 11-year-old girl consented to what took place. So many people now saying if you follow through the policy that is unfolding, it's happening in Germany, it's happening in Denmark, other European countries. Here we've got France.
Well, and it's happening here because just last week we were reporting the Rotherham compensation situation where the issue of consent was being used to deny compensation to people abused by the Rotherham rings. So, you know, at what point does the legal system decide that somebody who's not even a teenager yet is capable of making a decision which amounts to consent?
Dangerous stuff.
Absolutely.
Dangerous stuff. Now, if we come in at a different angle, we reported a couple of days ago that the Times had used child abuse campaigner Robert Greene in a very crude attempt to smear the Chief Constable of Wiltshire, Mike Veal, the man investigating Ted Heath for child abuse. Particularly dirty article. The gentleman concerned is this man, Martin Ivans, and I've just flagged up, this is an old article here from 2013, but he's had to apologise before for what he's done, and in this particular case he'd allowed a cartoon to be published which offended the Jewish community. So he's not without controversy, but of course to use Robert Greene as an attempt to smear Mike Veal was particularly unpleasant. I can tell our audience today that Robert Greene has emailed Mr. Ivans. I'll just read a little bit. Dear Mr. Ivans, I'm surprised not to have even received an acknowledgement to my email regarding the, quote, utterly disgraceful, ill-researched, unbalanced and fundamentally cowardly article that was published on Sunday. It was bad enough that the Sunday Times tried to use me inaccurately to undermine a brave and gallant police officer in the course of his duty, but you have also attempted to discredit an amazingly courageous disabled victim of rape when the slightest piece of research would have discovered that all the published independent expert witness evidence on which I relied had not the slightest doubt that she had been a genuine victim. Your journalists were really attacking Holly's allegations, not mine. What is worst, while you picked on a disabled woman who has endured years of multiple rape, the Times Group did not have the guts to publish the Information Commissioner's ruling against Alex Salmond, Nicola Sturgeon, and the other members of the SNP cabinet who so cruelly tried to cover up Holly's case. And Robert Greene went on with further criticism of that Times article. I understand Robert has now received an acknowledgement from the paper, but at the moment he hasn't had any form of retraction or correction to that pretty appalling article. But I can also add that Robert ended his email to the Times saying, whose side are you on? Are you on the side of the abusers, or are you actually working to protect children from abusers? So that's really the key question. We now wait to see what the Times is going to do.
Just before we move on from this subject, Alex Thompson mentioned the interview this afternoon on Blog Talk Radio with Wilfred Wong, the satanic ritual abuse expert. That's actually at 4 p.m. this afternoon, not 5 p.m. as Alex said. But if you need the URL for that, have a look at yesterday's program and you can find that. Okay.
Excellent.
Now, extremism, Brian, and of course we have been bombarded in the recent months with the run, hide, tell motif. In the rare event of a firearms or weapons attack, we're told we've got to run to a place of safety. We've got to hide. We've got to remember to turn off our phones and be silent. And we've got to tell by calling 999, but only when it's safe to do so. So this is the message that's been sent out. But of course, this has been a a campaign targeted at adults. Well, counterterrorism police have today launched their first ever safety campaign aimed at children and teenagers. It's going to teach 11 to 16-year-olds apparently how to act in the unlikely event they're caught up in a gun or knife attack. And the campaign's going to be called Act for Youth. Now, I noticed that there's a number of other Act for Youth campaigns, including a couple of European ones. It's not to be confused with this new one, which is going to maintain this run, hide and tell sort of meme. Kids are going to be taught, this is what they say, I don't like the language here, kids are going to be taught to run if they're able to, hide if they're not, and tell police of the threat only when it's safe to do so. They're also going to be advised to warn others about an ongoing threat, and crucially not to stop and use their mobile phones until they're safely away from danger. They're saying that, as I said, all counter-terrorism messaging so far has been aimed at adults, but this is going to be aimed at children. They've also teamed up with key partners such as NSPCC, Childline and Educate Against Hate. So the question here is, what is this about? Is it really about preparing children for events, or is it about putting fear into children, or is it in fact about getting children to think about radical things and radicalization? It's a bit like the Prevent strategy, a bit of a psychological operation going on them here.
This is a pernicious attack on children's minds, is what it is. This is not simply to do with terrorism. There's something much deeper and darker going on.
Okay, so the first of two new Run, Hide, Tell videos are going to feature TV personalities Bear Grylls and Ant Middleton and a few other so-called celebrities. And this is going to be followed up in October by a second longer video designed to explain the Run, Hide, Tell messaging and to teach children how to spot and report suspicious behaviour or suspicious items. So it's all also about encouraging spying and reporting and all this kind of stuff. And then they say that later phases of the campaign are going to launch this messaging across youth groups such as the Scouts, Guides and Cadets before finally being made part of the PSHE curriculum of formal education at schools and colleges. So that's good. Yeah. It's going to become part of the formal education process.
And we've already had former members of the Metropolitan Police tell us about their concerns with the Prevent strategy. The view of some officers is that it is that Prevent strategy which is creating the radicalisation of young children. But of course, nothing of those views is coming forward in the BBC or other so-called mainstream media. Well, what sort of country are we living in? Fear of terrorism. We've now got armed police, and the simple reality is those police are demonstrating a shoot-to-kill policy. So let's just remind ourselves of the horrific events for the Portishead shooting yesterday. So a man who has apparently been seen with a gun leaves the M5, armed police stop his car, they approach it, and then they back off. And the estimate is that they then pump 10 rounds into the car. They then break in and, quote, attempt to resuscitate him. So that was quite a big headline yesterday. Absolutely fascinating that a brutal death, a killing, disappears off the BBC News. It's old news. It's simply gone now, if you have a look at that page. So we spoke to the IPCC this morning. They sent us through their media statement. You can freeze this on the screen to read it yourself, but I'll just read a little bit of it very quickly. The Independent Police Complaints Commission is independently investigating after a man died following an incident involving police firearms near Portishead. The man died at the scene on the A369 Portbury 100 shortly after 9:30 this morning. After being notified by Avon and Somerset Police, IPCC investigators have been at the scene today gathering evidence and overseeing forensic examination. We've been advised that officers were responding to reports of a man travelling on the M5 with a handgun and that he had threatened another motorist. IPCC investigators are also attending post-incident procedures where the officers involved are expected to provide their accounts in connection. IPCC will oversee the procedure where any police firearms involved will be examined to determine whether they were discharged, and if so, how many times. What appears to be a non-police issue firearm was found at the scene and will also be subject to examination. Inquiries continue, and they're trying to identify the deceased and his next of kin. They do say a bit more, but remarkable stuff, Mike, and I was just fascinated by this term that a non-police weapon was found at the scene. I'm not quite sure what that means.
It's fascinating because, as we discussed this morning, Brian, why didn't they just say a weapon was found at the scene? But they've specified a non-police weapon. Is that something just to distinguish it from the fact that there were armed officers on the scene, or is this guy himself a police officer?
Well, I did ask IPCC whether whether the man could have been a police officer themselves, and the press team said they couldn't answer that question in as much as they didn't know. So we're waiting. But yeah, very strange language. Let's have a look at some of the reporting. Here's The Guardian. Man dead after police surround car and shoot into it near Bristol. That's a pretty accurate statement. All of the papers that have got the video clip show a sequence where you can see a handgun on top of the car. This appears to be the main bit they're all talking about. So Avon and Somerset police said the vehicle left the motorway at junction 19. Officers stopped the car on the A369. But then there was an incident involving police firearms and a man has died, and we've referred it to the IPCC. This is more text from the article. The paper comments that a police officer can legally use force if there's an honest belief that a suspect presents a threat to life or if they're acting in self-defense. This is a use of force. This is not just simply shoot people. There's a big difference here. So slightly disingenuous reporting by The Guardian. Among armed officers, one of the hardest tasks is dealing with a suspect believed to have a gun who is in a moving vehicle. But he wasn't in a moving vehicle because he'd been stopped.
Yeah.
So what's going on here? Well, let's come back to the BBC. According to them, a man dies after police surround the car. They forgot the weapons, but they quickly go to IPCC. We're going to bring in this lady. She's IPC Commissioner Cindy Butts. She says, at this stage, we're currently investigating the circumstances of the incidents and no individual police officer is under investigation. So nobody's done anything wrong at this stage.
Well, this is interesting. You asked me the question earlier. Is the reason that multiple officers shoot so that no single person could be held responsible?
I believe that this is what's going on, Mike. I'll just add a bit in here because this is a bit more. They go on to say there would have been a large number of witnesses given this incident took place on a busy road during rush hour. We'd ask that anyone with information comes forward. Okay, so here's IPCC. What does the IPCC do? Well, let's have a look. Funded by the Home Office, we carry out our own independent investigations into the most serious complaints and incidents. Actually, they say a bit more. Let's bring the bit more in. We're completely independent of the police and the government. Who funds them, Mike?
Government.
The government funds them, but they're independent of the police and the government. And then if you look down in the second bit, it goes on to say that the commissioners who do the investigation, by law, can never have worked for the police. Well, this is very interesting because if you look at Cindy Butts, the police commissioner, IPCC commissioner now, where was she working? Metropolitan Police Authority. But of course, that was an independent role.
Yes.
You're working for them independently, but she can then come forward to head up an investigation into the police. This is madness. So let's come back. A witness said that she was driving along. She saw 5 or 6 officers all dressed in black. The air ambulance arrived. Medics got out and ran to a red car. It frightened us, and it's been upsetting now that we know he's been killed. He was someone's son.
Yeah.
So there's the emotion. Police in black killing people, and they're frightening members of the public. So back to Sergeant Tangy from Devon and Cornwall Police. This is the man who loves pictures of weapons. This is his Twitter page. What did he tweet out this morning? Well, he said, BBC News, Portishead shooting, man dies after police surround a car. If the police get too close to you, you die, Mike,
Yes.
apparently. And so that's what went out. He then retweeted this. My thoughts are with the officers involved and their families at this difficult time, doing the critical job we need them to. So according to the police mindset, the job is to get out there and kill some people. Now, I'll just run through this very quickly because we're on the stops for time. Go and have a look at the CPS site. You can see what the penalties are for having weapons: 5 years, 10 years, or life imprisonment. There's nothing to say that what we've now got is summary execution. There's the definition: when a person is accused of a crime and then immediately killed without a trial. And that's exactly what took place at the Portishead police shooting. We're now in a fascist state, Mike. Police defending the big corporations, and if you frighten the police, they're going to kill you.
Brian, I'll just say quickly in closing on this, it's amazing how far society has come. If this is acceptable to society today, it's amazing how far we've come in the last 30 years. Because if you remember when IRA personnel were killed on Gibraltar, and there was allegations of a shoot-to-kill policy, there was a huge outcry in this country, absolute outrage. And yet these people were people that were carrying weapons as a matter of course, that were blowing people up and so on. They were considered to be terrorists. There's no evidence of what this guy was at this stage.
Yeah.
But you know, the furore that there was at that time, and at this point, there's nothing in the media
Nothing at
offering
all.
any criticism.
And the other thing that came into my head was that you had Royal Marine Sergeant Blackman. He's under huge stress on the battlefield. He shoots a man. He ends up in prison. We've got a man in a car who may well have had a gun. He's simply killed on the spot. Just shot dead. And who's going to investigate the police? Well, the government is. It's very difficult to report this type of thing, keeping a straight face. We'll end there. Thank you very much for joining us.
I'll just say that I did a second little segment with Adam Gary about the Uber situation, and frankly, he raised so many issues in that little 5-minute discussion that I think we'll do that tomorrow, and we'll discuss it with David Scott.
Excellent. Well, there we are. Please join us tomorrow, same time. Thank you for joining us today. And if you're not yet a subscriber to UK Column, please consider taking out a subscription. Thanks very much for joining us. Bye-bye.